Thanks, you guys. And thank you to Roman Susan and the two of you. And it's the last couple weeks going back and looking at this project has been kind of crazy and fun. But what we're gonna do tonight is I'm gonna show you a bit of what the project looked like, talk a little bit through it very quickly, show you what the timeline was about, and then Mary and Kevin are going to sort of lead a discussion-y thing, right? That's not exactly what you call it, Mary, but it's a discussion thing.
Close enough. It's good.
Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen. PowerPoint, the obligatory PowerPoint. We can find it. There it is. And this first slide is actually the statement that we wrote to describe the piece when we were making it at Roman Susan. And I'm just going to read it. In a moment awash in militarized violence, white supremacy, and nationalism, the only schemes being offered by the dominant powers are the continued expansion of global capitalism, the overthrow of democratic ideals, and an embrace of authoritarianism and populism. Our recently elected chief executive and his administration are happily embracing these strategies. In contrast, people at the grassroots level are activated to resist, imagine, and create dynamic alternatives. Central to Lucky Pierre's project at Roman Susan is a participatory timeline capturing the first 100 days of the Trump administration. This living graph collectively charts the social, economic, and cultural forces currently at play. Typically, a timeline is a tool created from a historical and emotional distance used to make connections between the past and the present. At this time of profound conjuncture, can we collectively interpret history as it is happening? This impulse to decode current events can serve as a catalyst for conversation, an opportunity for co-learning, a counter moment of hope, and perhaps an antidote. And I think that's still true. So, so tonight we're going to talk about the old is dying and the new cannot be born. The project, and this is what happened during the first 100 days of the Trump administration, and now where we are now 4 years later. So we decided to make a timeline of the whole Roman Susan place, and we populated the timeline with entries from each of the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. Day one started at the window over here on the left side and wrapped around through, I'm pointing at the screen like you can see me, wrapped around to the right side where day 100 was. And I do not know exactly how we made it work out perfectly, but there was some mathematics involved and we did them. So the whole thing was made out of paper, so anyone could place events on it or write on it. Thoughts or reactions, they could put them anywhere on the timeline. To begin the population, to populate the timeline, we selected about 500 entries. There were like a few for each of the days, and then we placed them on the timeline before we opened it to the public. The top, the gray part, were actions of the Trump administration, and the bottom red part were actions of resistance. And you'll notice we tried to cover the whole space. See, even the railing is covered with paper. It's that attention to detail. And, oh wait, also this is the opening, but look, those of you who know the space, there's the bathroom door. We actually made it so you could make the bathroom door part of the timeline, but still you could use it. So this is the opening. During our time at Roman Susan, our I guess basically like 20 days, we hosted some events. Excuse me. There were discussions and lectures and readings and some group meetings, and then we had a barbecue, I think, to end it. And one of the things that we made sure of is that people could actually participate and enter their thoughts onto the timeline. We also would put up other places for people to write thoughts about more general or more specific issues. And here are some of the events we held. Had readings. We had a philosopher, designers. There you can see all the way over to the door there. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to lead you quickly through a selection of entries from the first 100 days of the Trump administration. So there's about 50 of 500 entries. And I hope it's not too triggering. It's kind of crazy to remember. So just going to go through these, and then I'm going to give it over to Mary. So this was the inauguration day. As you remember, the magnificent crowd and some activists being. January 20th, references to climate change have been deleted. Kellyanne Conway talks about her alternative facts, and just this one important thing that I need us all to remember was what Kellyanne Conway wore on the day of the inauguration. And I was noticing again today, I guess I tried to block this out, but if you look closely, those buttons are like little cats or something. Like
Barbie Napoleon.
Who does that? And who makes these things? But I'm sure she still has it in her closet. So anyways, so 27th, there was a Muslim ban. There was the crazy talk he had with the Prime Minister of Australia, the Dakota Pipeline, Republicans making sure that voting machines can be hacked. Trump's mad because Ivanka's clothes aren't in Nordstrom's anymore. Justice Department starts their crackdown on transgender people. Betsy DeVos is Betsy DeVos. She misspelled her apology, which is an amazing thing. Melania leads the crowd in a prayer. Trump's going to give us a greater health plan to take over that disaster of Obamacare. Rush Limbaugh tells us that the media enemies. February 21st, how Trump spent his first month in office, and those proportions was pretty much stay the same, I guess, throughout the whole 4 years. Immigration raids, calling the military operation. Private prisons are back. Homophobia, and this is the racism. Get out of my country. 44% job rating, record low. Trump, nobody knew healthcare could be so complicated. We're still in February. Trump begins the EPA rollback with executive order on clean water rules. And just to remember, for each of these dates, we probably had between 3 and 6 entries. So a lot of stuff was happening. You live in Trump country now, folks. More global warming. Ben Carson saying yet again one of the most outrageous things. I'll just let you all read that. No more climate change. Weekends of Mar-a-Lago. Russians releasing information on Clinton. Healthcare bill caused 24 million Americans to be uninsured. Keystone XL pipeline, ICE targeting sanctuary cities. Jeff Sessions, remember him? Grants will be withheld from sanctuary cities. Ivanka's going to take the job. Senate's going to eliminate retirement accounts for low-income workers. More climate change. Right to protest is in danger. Rating plummets even lower. Revoked the Fair Pay and Safe Workplaces order. EPA moves to dismantle programs that protect kids from lead paint. Yeah, what do you say? And this is only up to April 6th, when Trump says he's had a really successful first 13 weeks in office, and it's only been 11 weeks at that point. And that sort of made me think, like, maybe we'll just stop here and give it over to Mary, because this sort of sums up those first few months where Trump thought it was zipping by, and I was just horrified every day, and it seemed like this was so slow and it was going to last forever. And that was only to April 6th. So you see, we didn't even get through the day 100. And it's amazing because I have forgotten about so many of these events because I had blocked them out, or we were overwhelmed by stuff that came afterwards. But that was only the first 100 days. And there were 1,361 more to go. And this is the quote that inspired us to start this project. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mary and Kevin.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I'm glad you ended on that quote. Because I was just going to talk briefly about sort of part of my praxis as a organizer, which I am in part of my life, and then as an artist, has been this use of timelines. And Lucky Pierre, we've used them many, many times in our work. But for me, it's really grounded in some techniques I learned at the beginning of my organizing life that are based on the ideas of Antonio Gramsci. And part of it is this idea of the conjuncture. So I don't know if people are familiar with that term or not, but basically it's just like a period of time where the relationships of social forces are really in flux, and they're always in flux, but as opposed to a period of time, mostly when we think of analysis, we think of structural analysis, where like really static forces are really hard. Racism, homophobia, these things are really hard to affect. But there are times in history where social forces are just in turmoil and in flux. And it's a time of great risk, but great possibility at the same time. And so the uses of timelines is sort of part of that analysis process. And we've used them in Lucky Pierre many, many times over the years. But this particular moment felt both full of risk and potentially possibility. So I think that's how we started to think about the project. And when I was reflecting on it this last couple of weeks before this thing, I think part of it was also, I mean, at least I'm speaking for myself. I'd love to hear Michael and Kevin what you think, but I feel like part of it was like almost like my impulse to see like, well, if we just keep track of all these things, we'll be able to figure out what's happening. Like we'll be able to, like almost like a naive idea that we can control things if we were able to just keep track of it all and get everybody to help us do that, crowdsource it, and then we'll be able to see what's actually happening, which seems so dumb right now. It's so naive and like insane, because it was so much, and as much as we would keep track of all these things. We knew there were so many things that were like stuff disappearing from websites and research getting scrubbed. And, you know, we all remember all the craziness of that time period. And so we kind of wanted to, that, or just the other one thing I wanted to mention too, is I also feel like there's part of the Trump administration in general, and we're all sort of like easing into this other sort of time period and trying to figure out, but part of that whole period, 4 years, was just was about spectacle in a big way, right? And being very it was hard not to be pulled into the spectacle. And so many of the spectacles that happened were horrible and, you know, horrifying and damaging, and people died, and, you know, all those kinds of things. But there's also the sort of mundane, everyday sort of damage that was done that people, you know, maybe didn't even talk about. So there's so many layers to kind of excavate. And the image that Michael showed of like that little piece of time in this little 100-day assessment versus the 4 years, that's kind of where we wanted to kind of take people for a discussion. And I'm gonna hope that everybody's down for some participatory Jamboard experience here in a second. But I kind of wanted to just ask you before we move to that, to kind of reflect, sort of put yourself in the mindset of those first 100 days, if you can, like if there was a marker in that period of time, if it was when you found out Trump won, or if it was, you know, did you go to the Women's March or some other demonstration in that period of time, and like where you were emotionally at that time. And then thinking now sort of like after the 4 years, you know, do you feel like you're a different person? Like what did you learn in that time period? And I was just going to share, you know, from my own personal life, the image that comes up a lot is that my daughter was a freshman in high school when Trump won, that whatever that day was. And so she went into her first period class. And first of all, like, I know I went to the downtown on the train to work that day, and like people were like sobbing in the train car. And my daughter goes into her first period class, which was physics, and the teacher was crying. And like the physics teacher just put all the desks aside and got everybody sitting in a circle and just having a discussion and stuff. And so like emotionally I was thinking like, that's not normal, right? This is so not normal. Like it was that feeling of, you know, just displacement. This is really not normal. And having these crazy thoughts in my head, like, holy shit, like, will she even be able to go to college? Like, I don't know what, I was just having this. And she has been through a lot. She's just done her first year of college at home because of the pandemic, and it really sucked. She missed all of her senior stuff, blah, blah, blah. But she's grown a lot in that time period. And so those are the kind of things we kind of want to invite people to reflect upon and just share some thoughts and some stories. And I'm going to pop in a little link here. And if people would go to this link, there'll be a way that we can just think and write in this space together and then share some thoughts and some stories. So if people wouldn't mind popping into that link, it would be great. And then I can explain what we're going to do. Have people done, you can just unmute, have people, or wave your hands, have people done Jamboard stuff before? Nope. Okay.
I have.
Hi, Patricia. It's so nice to see your face. Okay, so let me explain what's going on here. So it's pretty simple. It's like a virtual, it's like if we were all in a room together and we get to use stickies. It's like virtual stickies. So if you go all the way over to the thing that looks like a sticky, which is under the arrow, and you say, you can just type in whatever you want into it and then save it. And it just pops right, it'll pop right there. So you can just go ahead and do that. But what we want you to think about, and we can just take some time, we don't have to talk, but kind of just have a little graphic here, trying to think about the main questions are sort of what has been lost in this last 4 years, and then what has been gained. And maybe you're thinking of more things that have been lost, than you are gain. But I think that there probably have, you know, I think we've all learned, and there have been other things that maybe have been gains. And I'm not trying to spin it in any way other than to really just, again, do some analysis. I'm really hungry for us just, thank you, somebody, whoever popped that in. I'm hungry for learning from you all. So, but I want people to look at things both at the individual level and the top level, at the top quadrants, and then at the collective level. So speak from your own personal life at the top, and then collectively as a society or a culture at the bottom. So yeah, let's just jump in and then we can discuss. Kevin, you want to add anything?
Oh, I added movement building.
Thank you.
Whoa.
How'd that happen? Whee! Wait. There we go. I don't know. There we go. Kind of get the idea. I love things that are on the border between things. They're always interesting to me. This is great. Maybe we could talk about a few of these things, but people, I say, please feel free to keep adding as we talk. I wonder, there's a couple of really great stories in here, but I just want to, and I might invite some people to share, but I wonder if anybody wants to just volunteer to kind of share anything on the personal level about things gained or lost. I'd love to hear, does the person who, it's getting covered up now, but was talking about authoritarianism in Guatemala, whoever that is, would you be willing to kind of speak to that? I thought that was interesting.
Hi, yes, I'm Francisco. I'm a friend of folks here.
Hi.
I'm not in the US, I'm in Canada. I live in Toronto, but I came to Canada as a refugee from Guatemala. And I think the really important, perhaps even global thing that was lost for me was a sense that those of us who fled countries like Guatemala to come to countries like Canada or the United States as asylum seekers fled because part of the notion of these countries taking refugees meant that these kinds of things couldn't happen. So there was just, the night he got elected, my partner and I went to sleep at a certain time because it wasn't looking good. And we woke up at around the same time in the middle of the night and we saw our notifications and we saw what had happened. And I mean, my partner is like a white Canadian guy, you know, who's never really been afraid of anything. But we sort of looked at each other in terror. And the only thing that came to my mind, and I know this, and I know these kinds of historical comparisons are not helpful or accurate, but the only thing that came into my mind was memories I have of the footage of Hitler marching on Paris, thinking which was the biggest city in the country next to the United States and where things might go. And so, yeah, for those of us who fled, it was really weird to see these kinds of things that have been fomented by the US in countries like Guatemala, countries like Chile, sort of return home. And there was no sense of, there was nothing but sadness, to be honest, in that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's so true. It's like the chickens coming home to roost in this really sad way. Like you're saying, the US foments those kinds of that destabilization in other countries. And then we see it, but people flee here thinking it's going to be safe. It's just a lot. Yeah, I was just going to say, a really close friend of mine, it's just when you mentioned the Hitler comparison, I think a lot of people went there emotionally. Like a really close friend of mine who's Jewish, like we ended up talking at like 4 a.m, you know, election night, because neither one of us could sleep, and she dumped all her stock. That night she sold everything because her dad was a Holocaust survivor, and it was like her first impulse was just, you know. So I think a lot of folks did have very dramatic reactions. Thank you. Yeah, anybody else does that resonate for anybody? Anybody else have a story that they'd like to share about either things that have been lost or gained? You can just unmute.
Sorry. So among my circle of folks here in the New York, New Jersey area, I was the only one convinced Trump was going to win. And I mean, absolutely positively convinced, couldn't see another scenario. And when he did win, many of my friends were weirdly uncommunicative with me for a couple of
You were a Cassandra.
Yeah, it was like, and to this day, they still bring it up, you know, they still bring it up as like, she was the only one. But the other thing that was really heartbreaking for me, I was watching it with a dear friend of mine who's a public school teacher in New York and teaches at a school that is primarily immigrants. And when we saw where it was going, he basically turned to me in tears and said, I got to go to bed. My kids are going to be so scared tomorrow. I have to kick you out. I need to do what I have to do to get some sleep because I'm going to have to take care of a lot of little people. And it was just heartbreaking, you know, that the idea that the visual that I had at that moment was like the way cat scratch fever goes through your arm, where you can see it and the little tentacles and the little tributaries, that it was just going to touch absolutely everything.
Whoa, that's quite an image. Wow. Oh, thanks, Patricia. Yeah, I wonder, I noticed a few people also mentioning like tense family relationships. Does anybody want to speak to that? I know I've had several tense family relationships in that period. Stopped talking to at least one person. Yeah, maybe that's just a sign of the times. I think, yeah, go ahead.
In a weird way, it's like it took something like that to push my very middle of the road parents off the immediate middle of the road and be like, whoa, this is real wrong and real scary. Because they would constantly be in that territory of like, how are you undecided? How do you not know where you're with these things? But yeah, it frightened them enough that they changed.
And so they changed toward more progressive ideas, or did they or did they buckle down? Yeah.
There was some situation where like a relative was like, have you heard of the ACLU? I'm like, yeah, but I'm glad that is now like, you know, popping up in your feed and you know, it's real.
Wow, what's this crazy organization?
Yeah.
That's funny. So you had, Patricia, you had people in your family go opposite ways?
Yeah, which is odd because for a very long time I was the only lefty in my family, and my dyed-in-the-wool card-carrying Republican sister shifted the other way, and my other sister, who is only 2 years older than she is like Newsmax, OAN, like she's gone complete, and all of her children have gone. It's like entire families went in opposite directions. So the weird thing is I'm still speaking to everybody because I refused to stop speaking to anyone in my family. That was the line in the sand for me. But, and I had to do a lot of like working on communication, but they're no longer speaking, but those two families are no longer speaking to each other. And these are two women who their entire lives until this happened started every day with a morning phone call to each other. And now they don't speak.
Oh, that's so sad.
And it's again, like the word that keeps coming up to me is heartbreaking. But
so somebody said something related to the, were you going to say something, Barbara?
Yeah, I was remembering that right after Trump was elected, there was a large family gathering of my extended family, first cousins. And I went in, there had been a show that Deb Sokol did, and she gave out these buttons that said some concerns about the candidate, which I was wearing on my lapel. And these were people who I grew up with, and through a secondary source, I learned that all of these cousins who were of my generation were Trump supporters, and I was just, if I had a fuck Trump button on, I could never have started the conversations. But I honestly, because I had this sort of weirdly neutral button on about some concern about the candidate, I could engage them in these conversations. But what I was so utterly surprised by, because I needed to know, like, why did you vote for them? And the tendency for people to lump Trump supporters into this monolithic group instead of really hearing, or I needed for my own sense of reality, I think, to try to hear what it was. And it, ranged from, oh, everything he said is just campaign bluster, all politicians lie, he's not going to act on it. And this was, right after he got elected, and ranging to, just vicious tirades against me, of that, because I wouldn't think that Trump wouldn't be good for the country. And so many people, as the administration rolled on, defended him because they thought the stock market was doing so well. We're able to overlook, I mean, that was just like, what line if you're living in a smoking, in a destroyed world, does it really matter that you have money in your stock market accounts? And that was really shocking to me, but anyway.
Yeah, no, that's real. That's fascinating.
I never got a follow-up. I saw again the extended family about halfway through the administration, and interestingly, I have a disabled cousin, and when Trump mocked the reporter who was disabled, they then said, "I now regret voting for him." And it was interesting to see what, just the lines people drew for when he was too much.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Was somebody else jumping in there?
A couple things. The first was I support Trump because the stock market is doing well. I never quite believed, because I also felt like if the stock market tanked and he was still going after brown people, they'd still support him.
Yeah. Yeah, there would be some reason for, like, oh, the market is volatile, it's going to be rebound. Yes, there would. But boy, that was, the easy answer for a lot of it.
It kind of reminds me, there's somebody put something here that I think is really interesting, that I think is probably operates at an individual level, but it feels also kind of collective to me. And I wonder if this person would be willing to speak to this, or if it resonates for anybody else, but ability to believe that the other side has good intentions and conversation is possible. I'm not sure who wrote that. Oh, it was you? So what are you thinking about that?
I can, and this even goes to my family, I can no longer believe that they voted for Trump because of the stock market. I can no longer believe that they're not kind of awful people who I don't want to talk to anymore. I no longer believe that I have any reason to have a conversation with some of these people. That there's any way for them to hear me or me to hear them. And I kind of hate that absolutism, but it feels like I'm so far from being able to understand how such hatefulness can be rationalized. And and I'm sure there is an opposing view to that they can't understand about me, like, I don't know, why I like boys or something. I don't know.
Well, I wonder, that's really real, I think a real thing for a lot of people. And I just wonder, like, and I'm sorry about that too. I wonder if, do folks feel like I just kind of wonder, because I remember this one older relative, like talking about the 60s or whatever, and they were like, oh, but the country was so divided, you have no idea, like you just really have no idea how polarized things were. And this was maybe during the Iraq War or something. I'm like, I'm like, oh God, give me a break. Things are polarized now, you know? But it's like, whoa, things got a lot worse. And so I just wonder, like, if people feel like, where are we collectively with that? Is that, you know, are people really unable to talk to each other now still? Like, or like, I don't know, any thoughts about that?
I wonder about my mother-in-law and father-in-law were, you know, she was the staunch Democrat and he was a staunch Republican. They died, they both died before Trump was in office, but they lived their life together and, you know, always had civil discussions about their opposing views. And I like, what happened, you know, that you couldn't, like, politics just became so polarized in this, particularly in this moment. I mean, it'd been moving up to that, but it was like you knew not to bring it up if you were at a dinner party or but they were able to, you know, they lived together and had opposite you know, really opposing views of how government should function. And maybe it wasn't so much, I think maybe because it was more centered on how government functioned versus the kind of sexism, racism that got exposed under Trump. Yeah. That he gave permission to, that he was getting away with. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's reminding me actually, Michael and Kevin, do you remember? Because I remember this really striking me actually, that one of the talks that the little events that we had at Roman Susan during this show, one of the speakers was Huda Katabi, who's a Iranian Muslim fashion blogger, she's just incredible. She runs the first like immigrant run co-op, sewing co-op. It's called Blue Tin Co-op. It's here in Chicago, but she also does this really cool, you should check her out on Instagram, this book club, like an international book club called Because We've Read. And right now they're doing like a whole series on like anti-Blackness internationally. And the thing that they're reading this month is about Black Iranians. But anyway, I digress. She brought up in this workshop that we had, she was like, people were saying, oh my God, everything's so polarized. And she was like, that's good. She's like, polarization is exactly what we need right now. We need to know where people are at. And I thought that was so powerful. I was just really fascinated by that idea. And yeah, I mean, and I feel it, like if you feel the pain of separation, maybe with some people that you just cannot deal with anymore. But I guess on some level, it's like that idea of apocalypse is like a revealing, right? And that was an idea that made a lot of sense to me at the beginning stages too. Okay, these things are being revealed right now, and so then that we can move if we know what's actually happening. So I share that to maybe just transition to like, what have we gained? Do people have any things that they felt like they've learned or gained through these last 4 years, either individually or you know, collectively as a culture, as a country, as a community? Anybody want to volunteer some thoughts there?
Well, I certainly, I feel like I had a better understanding about history when I look at the histories of other countries, which, you know, just the sense of how absolutely fragile democracy is. And the fact that when I look at other histories and you wonder about how did people let this happen? And then it was happening, you know, it was happening right before, even with massive protest and I feel like I was grateful that the Justice Departments held the line on some of these things. That are, you know, the when things went to court, they were put down. It was like the final blockade for many things that Trump did. Not everything, but anyway, a much more compassionate sense of history and how things can absolutely roll out when there's a majority of the population who doesn't agree with how it's happening.
Yeah, it's pretty frightening how quickly things can happen.
It really was. And that
I wonder, Robert or Jim or KG or Nathan or Kristen, any thoughts you guys have about any of these things? Just want to make sure people have a chance to chat if they wanted to. Who put trust in the middle? I think that's pretty interesting. And why'd you put it in the middle?
I was just unmuting myself to say hi. And also, I'm the person that put trust in the middle.
Oh, perfect.
And I think I really liked that jam session, but I think I was the person that spun the thing.
Okay.
I'm on an iPhone. And so when that happened, I said, I'm going to chill out. But I did get to put the trust in there. So that was me.
You win. That was awesome.
Thank you. I thought.
So yeah, no, what was your thinking putting it in the middle?
My gut response was that it was somewhere within the lost. But as I was writing the sticky, I realized it was kind of hovering, and I realized, I actually did gain a lot of trust through this too. I learned also how to ask for help and be helpful reach out to see if other people needed help in a way that I I didn't quite know.
Yeah, that's so great. That's really powerful, I think. When I do I do a lot of workshops on shared analysis, kind of based on these Gramscian ideas, and a lot of the times stuff that's like on the line is like a powerful thing that you can work with as an organizer. And so I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I think I have to look here and see what people said, but I know I wrote so many relationships. I feel like I know so many more people in my neighborhood even over the last 4 years than I did last time. I just wondered, have other people had that experience too, of just kind of through necessity, either going to demonstrations or, definitely in the last year with just checking on your neighbors, making sure people are okay, sharing things, like, okay, I do have more hand sanitizer. I'll drop it over, did other people have that experience as well? Or does anybody want to speak to other things that maybe were gained in this time period?
I have kind of a funny, beautiful thing that happened. I just moved to the neighborhood, to Edgewater, and I was walking my dog and I noticed like a nice part of a building. So I decided to take a picture for a friend, and someone came out of the house at the same time. And we made eye contact, and we were masked, and we couldn't really speak through facial expressions, and we were distanced too. But I felt just compelled to speak to this person. And it felt like any opportunity to do so felt special. And so that eye contact, I said hi, and they also responded the same way. And then it turned out it was Colleen Plum, who's also an artist in the neighborhood. And then, so this like very warm interaction during a time where that was so rare.
Yeah. That's cool. That's really cool. And then like there'll be like a special bond you guys have, right? Of that nice moment.
Yeah, totally.
That's great.
Yeah, I feel like the contrast, like I think that the contrast with the news cycle that you highlighted in your work and the sort of like constant bombardment, I think Kevin had mentioned in the chat, like this sort of like chaos being used as a weapon to like get everybody's attention and to get everybody's panic going. I feel like the contrast between that and what's going on now, not to say that there are probably a lot of things that we should know more about that we don't. And there's definitely still a lot of problems with administration that I feel like need our attention. But I think that maybe on some level, I'm noticing that there's an awareness among my family that they might have been sort of like bamboozled or like propagandized a little bit, and they're kind of like, hey, wait a minute, I don't have to think, or like, I don't agree with what the TV announcer is saying right now. And like, I think that they're like kind of having these awakening moments that I'm starting to observe. I mean, kind of like tying in all these different conversations about family and our relationship with people who we might not understand, even though we think that we should understand because they come from the same place that we do. But like, we just have to work a lot harder to figure each other out and to just sort of like look at our surroundings in terms of like, hey, you know, we're all in this together, and how can we help each other on these really basic levels that remove us from that sort of like spin of like kind of like panic and chaos.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Interesting. Of just the way I mean, do you remember, I don't know if people were around in the 90s. I certainly was. And media literacy was like the big buzzword. Like, everybody was about media literacy. And then I'm like, where the hell did that go? That's what we need right now. You know, it's like it completely disappeared. And that's what people need. But it is cool to hear people questioning those things now. Yeah. I think I just noticed the time. I'm just enjoying the conversation. We're supposed to wrap pretty soon. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. Oh, ish.
Whatever you want to do is fine.
I mean, just curious. I don't know if people have other things that they gain. I know, Kevin, you were saying sitting on the front porch, which just makes me feel like a slowed down sort of sense. Like, what did you gain from that? What's your take on that?
I mean, for the first time, I was like engaging with neighbors who kind of recently moved in, and it was a little bit different on my block because I live 5 doors down from Lori Lightfoot. So what Chicago didn't know was that for the month of May, the block was on lockdown. So there were barricades up at both ends of the street and the 2 adjacent streets and the back alleys. And you usually had to show an ID to get onto the block and meet somebody at the gate if you were having a guest come over. And then finally what happened was a reporter came around and interviewed the neighbors, and then there was an article in the newspaper, and she was asked about it at a press conference, and then it stopped. And I was like, really? Like, the reporters didn't get wind of this? Like, it's been weeks. I should have called them. But, you know, it was kind of interesting to commiserate with the neighbors who, you know, we had a conversation about, yeah, this is actually what other parts of Chicago feel like on a regular basis. You know, this kind of like presence,
over policing
and over policing, and then there were also the neighbors who, you know, would tell, let's say, to the police, I'm praying for you, and stuff like that. So, you know, I know the neighbors I want to like hang out with now and the ones I don't.
Polarization.
Yeah. But Mary, I wanted just to comment about the kind of like media literacy thing. I was, you know, I was listening to an interview recently about that, and they were kind of talking about that in terms of, you know, the internet, and in terms of focusing on grade school children now to work on digital literacy, and kind of, and that they were saying like it's going to be like a generation of education that's necessary in terms of with the rapid kind of like flux of information.
Yeah.
And when you kind of like, it's interesting though too, because when you like watch like Hotel Rwanda and you look at the genocide there,
Mhm.
the radio was deployed in the same way and
Mhm.
weaponized in the same way that the internet has been. So like it's so interesting that the like impulse to sway public opinion and distribute misinformation to illicit violence has just always been there, and now this
Mhm.
just the dissemination and speed by which we're able to do that is incredible.
It is. I'm so glad you brought that up, Kevin. And it's also like, I think it's easy for a lot of us to think like, well, I would never be taken in by that. I would know that it's different. But like, I don't know if anybody else was getting signal messages a couple weeks or like last week, whatever it was, that Lori Lightfoot was having an affair. I mean, I was getting it like from all these like activists, like people connected to the Democratic Party, like getting all these text messages like, Lori Lightfoot's going to resign tomorrow. She's having an affair. She got, this whole thing. And I was like, holy shit, and I didn't text it to too many people, but one or two. And I was like, oh my God. And then I was like, I know. And then people were like, no, this person who's really, I don't know. I knew all these people. They were like, oh, I'm not going to say any names, but so-and-so, they are in the know. They called me. If they called me, then I know this is really happening. And so I was like, wow, this is so real. And then the next morning you wake up and it's like total fucking hoax. People think maybe the cops spread it, who knows, but it's like, these were all like leftists spread, getting bought this story because we all hate Lori Lightfoot. But so I think it's really fascinating and scary and interesting, but I guess we're close to time, and I feel like there's so much to unpack here. Just I was really excited about this conversation because I feel like I'll be doing this for myself a lot in the next year, just trying to peel back these layers. And I just wondered if anybody wanted to share. You certainly don't have to, but just if I guess my final question would be like, has this experience have you taken action or had a desire to take action in any kind of a way that was different after coming through this period of time? Anything simple, even simple, that's just about how you live your life or like how you want to contribute to a cause. Anybody have something like that they wanted to share? Sort of what did this period of time make you do, I guess?
I wrote a lot of checks to the ACLU. Every time.
Excellent.
I would get pissed off. Outraged at the news. I would get my checkbook out. I'm like, they just need money. They have to fight this. It has
Absolutely.
Yeah, I did.
I think you're not alone. They're awash. That's great. I think one thing that I'm a organizer, so I kind of do that kind of stuff all the time. But one thing that was different that I didn't anticipate is I kind of started to, just as a personal self-care kind of strategy, I had to start tuning out the news because I couldn't function really. So that's like a weird to do, but it is true. That was sort of like a change that happened.
Well, I got off of all social media because I took a quiz about whether or not you could decipher what was real and what wasn't real on social media. And I consider myself pretty well informed, and it was a 15-thing quiz, and it was like, here's the real New York Times headline, here's a fake one. Can you tell the difference? I got every single one of them wrong. Every single one. And I closed my Facebook account that like within an hour. I was like, wow. Okay, I'm not smart enough for Facebook, and stuff like that kept happening. I was like, I can't manage Twitter. Well, Instagram's got me. So, so I'm like, I have no social media at all now. but I'm much better and much less anxious about calling my representatives on pretty much a daily basis.
That's great. That's really good. We should engage with them. That's awesome. Yeah. Anybody else have a to-do that they accomplished or have in mind?
I feel similar about the social media. Like I'm just kind of like, I just want to know what people are doing in person. Like I just like, I'm gonna wait for that. Like that's fine. Like I don't like that just sort of knowing about something but not really knowing because you saw a thing, and like I just wanted you to tell me.
Yeah.
Just call me.
Back to that trust thing. You know the person and you can trust what they're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found a lot of solace in following Heather Cox Richardson, who was a political historian and would put things into a timeline perspective. She wrote she's a educator and scholar, but wrote a book about the history of the Republican Party. And she would just place the actions of what was happening. And in fact, these things have happened before in American history. And the arc of political, when the Southern Democrats were against, wanted to perpetuate the systems that the Civil War was fought to dismantle, and how politically they manipulated things. And because she's there was something about her, and like reading Rebecca Solnit's Hope in the Dark, which is a history, a much longer timeline about, it got me off the immediate panic attacks I was having every day, about understanding we're engaged in something that's stretching out over a much longer period of time, and that the knee-jerk reaction to it is not necessary. It's like we're in therapy, this needs to take a long time to play out.
Yeah. Another reason why timelines are so useful, right?
Yeah.
It's that, think about the stretch. Yeah. So that's where we're at. I guess, maybe we can get together in another 4 years and see what's up. Nathan and Kristen will invite us.
My blood pressure went up listening to that first 100 days again.
Thanks, Michael.
Well, I hope that everyone can engage in creative actions, no matter how small, to sustain yourself and people around you.
Such a beautiful way to close out. Kristen, thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was so fun to just get to chat with people and see people and share ideas. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Yeah, our pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's so wonderful to see your faces and to hear your ideas, and keep going. We need you.
Take care, y'all.
Yeah, have a good night.
Night.